Chapter 1. You can tell a lot about a man just by how his message is read, even before you ever see him in person. There's a certain weight behind words that either holds value or gives it away too easily, and most people don't realize how obvious that difference is. You've probably seen it yourself when you scroll back through old conversations, noticing how some messages feel grounded while others feel like they're reaching for something. It's not about the words themselves, it's about what sits underneath them, something you can feel even through a screen. And once you start paying attention to that, patterns begin to show up in a way that's hard to ignore. You notice how quickly some conversations lose their balance, how one person starts carrying more of the interaction than the other. The replies get longer on one side, quicker on the other, more frequent in one direction, more delayed in the opposite. It creates a kind of imbalance that doesn't need to be pointed out for it to be felt. You can sense when someone is trying to keep something going instead of letting it move naturally. That effort shows up in ways that feel subtle at first, but become obvious the longer the conversation continues. You've probably been on both sides of that without even realizing it at the time. There are moments where you felt in control of the conversation without thinking about it, where your responses came naturally and didn't need to be forced. And then there are moments where you found yourself thinking too much before replying, adjusting your words, trying to keep the interaction alive. That shift doesn't happen randomly. It comes from how you see the interaction and how much value you place on it in that moment. And the more you place value on it, the more it starts to control how you move. It's easy to think texting is just about saying the right thing, but when you look closer, you realize it's more about how you're saying it and what your energy feels like through it. Two people can send the same message, and it lands completely differently depending on how it's delivered. You can feel when someone is relaxed versus when they're trying too hard, even if the words look the same on the surface. That's why some conversations flow without effort, while others feel like they're constantly being pushed forward. The difference is in the presence behind the message, not just the message itself. You might notice how certain conversations feel lighter, where you're not thinking about what to say next or how something will be received. There's a rhythm to it that doesn't require effort, where replies come naturally and the interaction feels balanced. That kind of flow doesn't come from strategy. It comes from how you're showing up in that moment. When you're grounded, the conversation reflects that. And when you're not, it shows just as clearly. It's not something you can hide, because it comes through in ways that don't need explanation. At the same time, you can see how quickly that flow breaks when the energy shifts. One person starts responding differently, maybe with more effort, maybe with more intention, maybe with more concern about how things are landing. That shift changes the dynamic because it introduces a kind of pressure that wasn't there before. The conversation starts feeling less natural and more managed, like something is being held together instead of moving on its own. And once that happens, it's hard to get back to that original flow without changing how you're approaching it. You might think this only happens in certain situations, but it shows up more often than you realize. It's in how quickly you reply, how much you say, how often you check your phone, how much you think about what to send next. Those small behaviors reflect how you feel about the interaction, and they shape how the other person experiences you. When those behaviors come from a place of trying to maintain something, they carry a different weight than when they come from a place of being present. That difference is what determines how the conversation feels overall. You don't need someone to tell you when a conversation feels off. You can feel it yourself when it happens. There's a certain tension that shows up, something that makes you more aware of what you're saying and how it's being received. That awareness can be useful, but it can also pull you out of the natural flow if you let it take over. And when that happens, the conversation starts to feel less like an interaction and more like something you're trying to manage. That shift is where most people lose their footing without realizing it. What makes it more interesting is that this isn't something you fix by changing what you say. It changes when you understand what you're bringing into the interaction. The way you see yourself, the way you see the conversation, the way you respond to the situation all shape how it unfolds. When you're centered, the conversation reflects that without effort, and when you're not, it shows just as clearly. That's why the same person can have completely different experiences depending on how they're showing up in that moment. It's not random, it's consistent with the energy behind it. If you've ever looked back at a conversation and realized exactly where it shifted, you already understand what this feels like. You can see the point where things started changing, where the balance shifted, where the interaction stopped feeling natural. That awareness is important because it shows you that these things don't happen out of nowhere. They happen through small changes that build over time until the dynamic feels completely different. And once you see that clearly, you start to understand how much control you actually have over it. If this is hitting in a way that feels familiar, drop a quick comment and just say, "Seen it," or something simple like that. Not for attention, just to lock in the fact that you recognize it, because most people scroll past things they already know without actually acknowledging them. And if you stay with this, you'll start seeing how these patterns play out in real time, not just in hindsight. Chapter 2. Your phone lights up, and before you even open the message, your mind already starts moving ahead of you. You're thinking about what she might have said, how you're going to respond, how it might come across, and what it could lead to. It happens fast, almost automatic, like your attention gets pulled into the conversation before you've even read a single word. You open it, read it once, then read it again, not because you didn't understand it, but because you're trying to figure out how to respond in a way that keeps things going. And without realizing it, you've already shifted from being present to trying to manage the interaction. You sit there for a second, typing something out, then deleting it, then rewriting it in a slightly different way. You adjust the wording, change the tone, add something, take something out, trying to get it just right. It feels small in the moment, like you're just being thoughtful. But there's a subtle tension behind it that wasn't there before. That tension comes from wanting the message to land a certain way, wanting to maintain a certain impression, wanting to keep the conversation moving in a direction you're hoping for. And the more you adjust, the more that tension builds, even if you don't fully notice it. There was a situation that played out exactly like this, and it didn't look like anything unusual from the outside. A guy was texting a girl he had just started talking to, and everything felt smooth at first. The conversation flowed naturally, replies came easily, and there wasn't much thought behind what was being said. Then, something shifted, not in what she said, but in how he started approaching it. He began thinking more about his responses, trying to keep the momentum, trying to make sure nothing fell flat. He started replying quicker than he used to, checking his phone more often, putting more effort into each message than the situation required. His responses got longer, more detailed, more intentional, and that shift changed how the conversation felt. It wasn't obvious right away, but over time, the balance started to lean in a different direction. She responded the same at first, but then her replies became shorter, less frequent, less engaged, and that's when he started trying even harder to bring it back. He added more to his messages, asked more questions, tried to keep things interesting, thinking that effort would fix what was slipping. But the more he did that, the more it felt like he was carrying the conversation instead of sharing it. The natural rhythm was gone, replaced by something that felt slightly forced. And even though he was doing more, it wasn't creating the effect he wanted. It was just making the imbalance more noticeable. What he didn't realize at the time was that the shift didn't come from what he said. It came from how he started showing up. The moment he began treating the conversation like something he had to maintain, it changed how his messages felt. That pressure came through, even without him realizing it, and it affected how she responded. It made the interaction feel heavier, less natural, less engaging in a way that's hard to explain but easy to feel. And once that feeling is there, it's difficult to reverse it without changing the approach entirely. You've probably experienced something similar, even if it didn't play out exactly like that. You felt the moment where things started to change, where you became more aware of the conversation instead of just being in it. That awareness made you adjust, and those adjustments changed the dynamic without you intending to. It's not something you consciously decide. It's something that happens when you start placing more importance on the outcome than the interaction itself. And that shift is what creates the feeling most people associate with trying too hard. You can feel it when you look back at those conversations, seeing how your messages started to change over time. The tone shifts, the effort increases, the balance disappears in a way that's clear once you step back from it. It's not about saying the wrong thing. It's about the energy behind what you're saying. That energy comes through in ways that don't need to be explained, and it shapes how the other person experiences the interaction. That's why things can feel off, even when nothing seems technically wrong. When you understand that, you stop focusing on the words themselves and start paying attention to how you're approaching the conversation. You notice when you're relaxed versus when you're trying to make something happen. You notice when you're responding naturally versus when you're thinking too much before replying. Those differences matter more than any specific message you could send, because they determine whether the conversation feels easy or forced, balanced or one-sided. You don't fix that by overcorrecting or trying to say less just for the sake of it. You fix it by recognizing when you've shifted out of that natural state and bringing yourself back to it. That means letting go of the need to control how the interaction unfolds and focusing on how you're actually showing up in the moment. When you do that, the conversation starts to move differently without you needing to force it. And that's when things start feeling natural again, the way they did before you started overthinking it. Once you see this clearly, you can't unsee it in your own behavior. You start catching those moments in real time, noticing when you're about to overthink something or put too much effort into a response. That awareness gives you the ability to shift before it changes the dynamic. And that shift is what separates conversations that flow from ones that slowly fall apart without an obvious reason. Chapter 3. 3 dots appear, disappear, then appear again. And somehow that small detail starts to matter more than it should. You catch yourself watching it, waiting to see what comes next, even though nothing has actually been said yet. It's a strange place to be in, where anticipation starts shaping how you feel before anything even happens. That kind of attention pulls you into the conversation in a way that makes everything feel more important than it is. And once you're there, it's easy to start reacting instead of just responding. You begin to notice how quickly your mood can shift based on something as simple as how long it takes her to reply. A quick response feels smooth, almost reassuring in a way you don't openly admit. A delayed one feels different, even if there's a logical explanation behind it. That difference starts influencing how you move, how you respond, how you think about what's happening. It's subtle, but it builds over time, shaping your behavior in ways that don't feel intentional. When that happens, you're no longer just texting, you're reacting to the space between messages. You're reading into timing, into tone, into things that don't always carry the meaning you think they do. That creates a kind of pressure that didn't exist at the start of the conversation. It makes you more aware, more cautious, more focused on keeping things aligned in a certain way. And that awareness changes how you show up, even if you don't realize it in the moment. You might start adjusting your response time without thinking about it, replying faster when she replies quickly, holding back when she takes longer. It feels like you're matching the energy, but it's coming from a place of reacting instead of being grounded. That difference shows up in how your messages feel. because they're no longer coming from a consistent place. They're shaped by what just happened instead of how you naturally communicate. And that inconsistency creates a dynamic that feels slightly unstable. You can feel it when you read your own messages back, noticing how your tone shifts depending on what you're responding to. Some messages feel relaxed, others feel slightly forced, even if the words don't look that different. That variation comes from how you're feeling in the moment, not from what you're actually trying to say. And the person on the other end picks up on that, even if they don't consciously think about it. It affects how they respond, how they engage, how the conversation unfolds. At some point, you realize that the conversation started controlling your behavior in small ways. You didn't decide to change how you text, it just happened as you became more aware of the interaction. That awareness turned into adjustment, and those adjustments changed the dynamic. It's not something you planned, it's something that developed over time. And once it's there, it becomes the new way you interact unless you catch it. You might think the solution is to control those variables more carefully, to time your responses better, to manage how you come across. But that approach keeps you in the same space, just with more effort behind it. The more you try to control it, the more you stay in a reactive state. And that state is what creates the tension in the first place. It's not about managing the conversation better, it's about not letting the conversation manage you. When you step back from that, something changes in how you experience it. The timing of messages stops feeling as important, the small details stop carrying as much weight. You're no longer watching every movement, you're just engaging with what's actually being said. That shift brings you back to a place where your responses come naturally again. And when that happens, the conversation feels different without you having to force it. You don't feel the need to fill every gap or respond immediately, because you're not being pulled by the interaction in the same way. You're present, but you're not attached to how it unfolds moment by moment. That presence creates a kind of stability in how you communicate. Your tone stays consistent, your responses stay natural, and the conversation starts to feel balanced again. It doesn't rely on constant adjustment, it moves on its own. You start noticing how much smoother things feel when you're not overanalyzing every detail. The conversation has a rhythm that doesn't need to be managed. It just flows based on how both of you are engaging. That rhythm isn't created through strategy. It comes from being grounded in how you show up. And once you experience that difference, it becomes clear how much of the previous tension came from overthinking things that didn't need that level of attention. That awareness changes how you approach every interaction moving forward. You're no longer focused on the small details that used to pull you in. You're focused on staying consistent in how you communicate. That consistency is what keeps the conversation balanced, not any specific technique or timing. And when you carry that into every interaction, the dynamic shifts in a way that feels natural instead of forced. Chapter 4. Your message sits there for a while, and you don't feel the urge to check if she's seen it or not. You put your phone down, pick it back up later, and nothing in you feels pulled toward it in that same restless way. The conversation is still there, still ongoing, but it's no longer controlling your attention in the background. That shift doesn't come from trying to act different, it comes from something settling internally. You're still engaged, but you're not leaning on the interaction to feel a certain way anymore. You start noticing how different your responses feel when they come from that place. They're shorter sometimes, longer other times, but they always feel clean, like you're saying exactly what you mean without trying to shape it. There's no extra weight behind them, no hidden intention to get a specific reaction. And because of that, they land differently, even if the words themselves aren't anything special. It's the absence of pressure that changes how they're received. You don't feel the need to entertain every message or keep the conversation constantly active. Some gaps exist, and they don't feel like a problem that needs to be fixed. The interaction breathes in a way that feels natural instead of controlled. That breathing space allows both of you to show up without forcing anything. And when things aren't being forced, they tend to move in a way that feels more real. At the same time, you start becoming more selective without thinking about it. You're not responding just to respond. You're engaging when you actually have something to say. That selectiveness isn't about playing games. It's about being aligned with how you feel in the moment. You're not filling space just to keep momentum going. You're letting the interaction exist without constantly managing it. And that changes the tone of everything without needing to explain it. You also notice how you stop reacting to shifts in her energy the way you used to. If she replies quickly, it doesn't pull you forward, and if she takes longer, it doesn't pull you back. Your pace stays consistent because it's coming from you, not from what's happening on the other side. That consistency creates a different kind of presence in the conversation. It feels steady, grounded, and not easily influenced by small changes. When you're in that state, the conversation doesn't feel like something you have to maintain. It feels like something that exists on its own, something you're a part of instead of something you're holding together. That difference takes pressure off both sides because there's no need to perform or keep things moving artificially. It allows the interaction to unfold in a way that feels natural without needing constant effort. And that's where the real shift happens. You begin to see how much of texting is influenced by how you feel before you even type anything. The message itself is just an extension of that state, not the cause of it. When you're grounded, everything you send reflects that without needing to think about it. When you're not, it shows just as clearly, no matter how carefully you choose your words. That awareness changes how you approach every interaction moving forward. You don't rely on tactics or patterns because you understand what's actually creating the effect. It's not about sending the perfect message. It's about being in a place where your messages don't need to be perfect to land well. That removes the pressure to get things right because you're not trying to control the outcome anymore. You're just engaging in a way that feels natural to you. And that natural engagement carries more weight than anything forced ever could. You might notice how differently she responds when the conversation feels like that. There's less tension, more ease, more flow in how things move. It's not something you asked for. It's something that emerges from how you're showing up. And because it's not forced, it doesn't feel temporary. It feels stable in a way that doesn't depend on constant effort. That's when you realize the shift didn't come from changing what you say. It came from changing how you exist within the conversation. And once that clicks, everything else becomes simpler without needing to break it down into steps. Chapter 5. You read your own message back, and for once, there's nothing in you that wants to change it. No second guessing, no rewriting, no trying to make it sound better than it already is. It feels complete the moment you send it, like it represents exactly where you're at without needing adjustment. That feeling is different from what you're used to, because most of the time there's at least some level of hesitation behind what you send. Now it's gone. And that absence of hesitation changes everything about how you carry yourself in the interaction. You stop trying to predict how she's going to respond because it doesn't affect how you feel about what you said. The message stands on its own, and you don't feel the need to monitor what happens next. That freedom creates a kind of calm that wasn't there before, something steady that doesn't shift based on her reply. You're still interested, still engaged, but you're not attached in the same way. And that difference shows up in how you move, even when you're not thinking about it. You start to notice how much clearer everything feels when you're not trying to control the outcome. Conversations become easier to read, easier to navigate, because you're not filtering everything through expectation. You're seeing what's actually there instead of what you hope it becomes. That clarity removes a lot of the confusion that used to come with texting, because you're no longer guessing or overanalyzing every detail. You're just observing and responding in a way that feels natural to you. That natural response creates a kind of consistency that doesn't rely on effort. Your tone stays the same, your pace stays the same, your presence stays the same, regardless of what's happening on the other side. That consistency is what makes your messages feel grounded, because they're coming from a stable place. It's not something you're trying to maintain, it's something that happens when you're not being pulled in different directions. And that stability changes how the interaction feels as a whole. You also become more comfortable with silence in a way you weren't before. Gaps in the conversation don't feel like something that needs to be filled immediately. You let things sit without rushing to bring them back to life, because you're not relying on constant interaction to feel secure. That space allows the conversation to breathe, and it removes the pressure that used to build when things slowed down. It creates a more relaxed dynamic that doesn't feel forced or managed. At the same time, you're more direct with what you say, not in a way that's intense, but in a way that's clear. You're not adding extra words to soften things or shape how they're received. You say what you mean and let it land as it is. That kind of clarity makes your communication feel more solid, because there's nothing hidden behind it. It's straightforward without feeling heavy, and that balance makes it easier for the other person to engage with you. You begin to realize that the way you text is just a reflection of how you feel about yourself in that moment. When you're grounded, your messages carry that without needing effort. When you're not, it shows just as clearly, no matter how much you try to adjust your words. That connection between your internal state and your communication becomes obvious once you start paying attention to it. And once you see it, you stop trying to separate the two. You don't feel the need to impress or entertain constantly, because you're not trying to earn anything through the conversation. You're simply engaging, allowing things to unfold without forcing them into a specific direction. That approach creates a different kind of interaction, one that feels more balanced and less dependent on effort. It allows both sides to show up naturally, instead of trying to meet an expectation. And that's where the real difference is felt. If this clicked in a way you didn't expect, drop a comment and just say, "I see it now," or something simple that reflects what you're thinking. That moment of recognition matters, because most people go through the same patterns without ever fully understanding what's happening. And if you've been stuck in that cycle before, you already know how frustrating it can feel. Saying something small is just a way of acknowledging that you're not moving blindly through it anymore. If you want more of this, where things get broken down in a way that actually shifts how you see your own behavior, stay connected. Because once you understand this at a deeper level, texting stops feeling like something you have to figure out. It becomes something that reflects who you are, and that's what makes it work without needing to force it.